It started with a knock, the kind that barely made a sound, like someone wasn't sure they belonged on the other side of the door. The Ridge Riders' garage wasn't the sort of place where strangers just showed up, especially not on a Tuesday afternoon when the rain was threatening and the town had already gone quiet. Most folks passed it without noticing. The building sat at the edge of a cracked industrial park, past the last working streetlight and across from an old freight line that hadn't moved a train in years. Rust crept up the corrugated metal walls like ivy. A bent sign above the entrance still read Ridge Riders, MC, in faded black letters. Inside, the place smelled like motor oil, old coffee, and memory. That's where she appeared. A teenage girl no older than 15, soaked from the misting rain, her sneakers caked in dirt, and a backpack slung low over one shoulder. She stood in the doorway like she'd been weighing her options for hours, then finally chose this one. Gregory Moss was the first to notice. The 62-year-old founding member of the Ridge Riders sat near the heater with a clipboard in his lap, reviewing invoices while sipping coffee that had long gone bitter. He glanced up, eyebrows raised. Behind him, Tommy Rhodes was elbow-deep in a tank repaint job, while Charlie Jenkins leaned against a toolbox, scrolling through his phone. The others barely looked up until the girl spoke. "I can paint," she said. Her voice was clear, not loud, but it cut through the air like a wrench dropped on concrete. "Bikes, helmets, whatever you got. I'll do it for tips." For a moment, no one moved. Then someone chuckled, not out of cruelty, but surprise. A girl asking to paint bikes in a shop like this? It wasn't just unusual, it was unheard of. Tommy gave her a sideways look, still holding a paintbrush. "You got a portfolio, kid?" he asked, half joking. The girl didn't answer right away. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a napkin, carefully folded like it held something sacred. The paper was stained with coffee and time, but she unfolded it gently and slid it across the workbench. What was drawn on it made the room still. It was a sketch of a custom emblem, a snarling wolf's jaw curled around a serpent, flames licking up the sides. The detail was impossibly sharp for something done in pen on a napkin. At the base of the design were the initials LH, and just below that, a date nearly a decade old. Gregory stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the concrete. He crossed the shop in 3 long strides and picked up the napkin. His hand trembled as he stared at it, eyes searching the lines for something only he could see. "Where did you get this?" he asked. The girl didn't flinch. "My brother drew it," she said. "His name was Logan Holloway." The room went silent. Charlie slowly set down his wrench. Tommy stopped breathing for a second. None of them had heard that name in years. Logan had been one of them, not just a member, but a brother in the truest sense. A man who could rebuild an engine blindfolded and still have time to tell a story that made you laugh till your ribs hurt. He painted bikes like they were alive, like each one had a soul. But he'd been gone almost 10 years now, lost to a crash on a rain-slicked highway. They'd buried him with a custom gas tank he painted himself, and with it, a part of the club's heart. No one had ever mentioned a sister. "You never talked about having family," Gregory said softly. The girl nodded. "He didn't talk about me much, but before he died, he told me if I ever needed help, I should find you, that you'd know what to do." Gregory looked at the napkin again. The emblem was unmistakable. Logan's style had always been bold, fierce, and precise. This sketch had his fingerprints all over it. "What's your name?" Charlie asked. "Ellie," she said. "Ellie Holloway." A long silence followed. Gregory finally exhaled, setting the napkin down like it might shatter. "You say you can paint," he said. "Let's see it." Tommy grabbed an old gas tank off the shelf and placed it in front of her. No stencils, no tracing, just raw metal and a few brushes. Ellie didn't hesitate. She tied her hair back, rolled up her sleeves, and started to work.
At first, the others returned to their tasks, half watching, but as her brush moved, fast, steady, instinctive, something shifted. The way she shaded the lines, the angles she chose. It was Logan's hand, but younger, sharper, breathing. By the time she finished, the room had fallen silent again.
Ellie didn't ask for much. She took the small back room near the paint bay without a word, curled up on a roll-out cot that used to belong to Logan, and didn't complain about the noise, the cold, or the smell of gasoline that lingered in the walls. She showed up early every morning, hair tied back, hands stained with primer and oil before most of the crew had their coffee. She painted with the same intensity every day, like it was the only language she trusted. And maybe it was. The guys gave her space, but they watched. It was hard not to. Tommy started setting extra brushes on the edge of his bench. Charlie left a bowl of chili next to her cot one night, still warm. Gregory didn't say anything, but he moved a space heater closer to the wall when the temperature dropped. Ellie never asked why they were helping. She just worked, like she was trying to earn her place with every stroke. Lucy was the one who started asking questions. She wasn't part of the garage crew, not really. She handled the paperwork, the bookkeeping, the taxes, everything the others didn't want to deal with. But Lucy had a good eye for what people weren't saying. She noticed Ellie's clothes were the same every day. She noticed the bruises on her knuckles. She noticed how Ellie flinched, not obviously, but enough, when someone raised their voice too fast or dropped a tool too loud. So Lucy brought her a sandwich one evening and sat down beside her with a folder she wasn't pretending to read. They talked about music, about paint techniques, about nothing at all. And eventually, Ellie started talking too. Not in a rush and not all at once, but over time, the pieces came together. Logan had died when she was just 5. After that, Ellie had been bounced from foster home to foster home, landing finally in a group home in a different county. At first, she thought it would be better. It wasn't. The rules didn't make sense. Punishments felt like they were made up on the spot. There were no bruises, but that didn't mean it wasn't violent. The worst kind of hurt, Ellie once said, is the one they tell you isn't real.
She had one sketchbook, just one, that she kept hidden. In it were Logan's bikes, drawn from memory. The flame patterns he loved, the exhausts he customized, the emblem he carried on his jacket. When a supervisor found the sketchbook, they told her to stop living in the past and threw it away. That night, Ellie climbed into the trash bin behind the cafeteria and pulled it out, pages damp and torn, but still legible. The next morning, she ran. She'd been on the move ever since. Bus stations, fast food bathrooms, anywhere with a roof and no questions. She painted shop windows for cash. She fixed a broken sign in a car wash for $10 and half a sandwich. And then one day, she ended up in the town Logan used to talk about. She remembered the name Ridge Riders. She remembered the emblem, and so she walked in. Lucy didn't say much after hearing it all, but that night she started digging. As a former paralegal, she knew where to look. She found Logan's name in county court records. Years ago, before his accident, he had filed for emergency guardianship of Ellie. The petition had been denied. The reason? The evaluator cited Logan's association with a motorcycle organization deemed culturally unstable. In simpler terms, being a biker disqualified him, regardless of his income, his clean record, or his willingness to provide a home. It wasn't just unfair, it was personal. The evaluator's report included phrases like unorthodox lifestyle and exposure to antisocial influences. There was no mention of Logan's volunteer work at the Veterans Center or the fact that he taught art classes at the local youth program on weekends. Lucy also found internal notes from the group home Ellie had escaped, complaints, reports filed by other teens, claims of manipulation, control, and emotional neglect. Many were marked unsubstantiated, then closed, but the pattern was clear. The system had failed Ellie long before she ever set foot in the Ridge Riders' garage. The more Lucy read, the tighter her chest felt. Logan had tried. He hadn't abandoned Ellie, he had fought for her. But the system had closed the door on both of them.
Now that door had swung back open, and the question wasn't whether Ellie deserved a home, it was whether the Ridge Riders had the courage to fight the same fight Logan once lost. The Ridge Riders had always known how to handle trouble. They'd faced road accidents, lost brothers, rival clubs, and lean winters, but nothing felt quite like this, because this time trouble had a name: Vincent Raynor. It started with Jeff, the youngest member of the crew. He had been helping Lucy dig through old club archives, hoping to find more records of Logan's petition. Instead, he stumbled across a thread of emails from nearly 10 years back, marked private but never deleted. Someone had been requesting background checks on club members, not the government, not a court, but a private law firm. In one of the emails, the client's name had been accidentally left unredacted. It was Vincent Raynor. At first, Jeff didn't recognize it, but when he brought the name to Lucy, her entire posture changed. Raynor had run with a rival club in the past, the Iron Reapers. He was known for being calculating, ruthless, and vindictive. His younger brother, Mason, died in a crash the same night Logan went down. Different roads, different counties, but close enough for assumptions. Rumors had always whispered that Logan ran Mason off the road, but no charges were filed, and the official reports told a different story. Logan had hit an oil patch and skidded out alone. Mason's accident happened nearly an hour later. The roads were wet, the night was unforgiving, but Raynor had never let go of the blame. Now, it seemed, he was circling again, only this time not for revenge in the way most would expect. He had hired a private investigator who specialized in locating runaways. That man had been spotted in nearby towns, asking quiet questions at shelters and diners. The same man had filed an anonymous report with Child Services just days earlier, naming Ellie and pointing out her location. This wasn't just about dragging her back into the system. It was about punishing her for being Logan's sister. When Lucy brought this to Gregory, the garage went silent. No one yelled, no one panicked. They just stood there, listening to the storm inching closer. "We need to act fast," Lucy said. "If the state picks her up before we filed anything, she's gone, and we won't get her back without a legal war." Gregory nodded once. "Then we fight smarter than last time."
They needed a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. Charlie remembered someone he trusted. Her name was Janet Clark, a family attorney with over 20 years in foster placement and custody disputes. She was known for taking on hard cases. She was also known for winning them. Charlie made the call, and Janet agreed to meet. That same night, as Ellie was still painting in the back, lost in her own rhythm, headphones on, brush in hand, the crew gathered in the office with stacks of documents spread across the table. Lucy laid out the timeline: Logan's petition, the denial based on lifestyle, the group home records, the report about Raynor, the potential threat. Jeff chimed in with location data. The investigator had been spotted just one town over that morning. Gregory leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on a photo of Logan taped to the wall. "We couldn't help him then," he said, "but we're not letting them take her now." Tommy was quiet, but not because he didn't care. He finally spoke after a long pause. "We need to be sure we're not just reacting. If we go in half ready, they'll eat us alive in court." Gregory nodded. "Which is why we build this like we build bikes. Every bolt, every wire. Clean, tight, no surprises." Janet met with him the next day in a small diner outside of town. She wore a dark blazer and carried a bag full of legal pads. She listened as Lucy laid out every document, every story, every risk. When they finished, Janet asked only one question: "Does the girl want to stay?" Gregory didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Ellie, who had come along for the meeting. Ellie hesitated. She looked out the window, then back at the faces around the table. "I don't want to go back to the group home," she said. Janet raised an eyebrow. "That's not what I asked." Ellie took a breath. "I want to stay, with them. This is the first place I've ever felt like I could breathe." Janet nodded. "Then we file an emergency petition. We challenge the system with their own failures, and we show the court what a real home looks like." The room fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't fear, it was resolve. Because for the first time in years, the Ridge Riders weren't riding away from something. They were riding towards something worth keeping.
The courthouse wasn't grand. It sat quietly between a closed-down hardware store and a bakery that opened only 3 days a week. The walls inside were faded beige, the kind of color that made time feel slower. But for Ellie Holloway, this room wasn't just another stop. It was the place that might decide her future again. Only this time she wasn't sitting alone. Gregory Moss sat to her right, his hands folded neatly in his lap, wearing the one button-up shirt he owned that didn't have oil stains on the cuffs. To her left was Lucy, papers organized in a neat stack, her expression calm but fierce. Janet Clark stood before them, already reviewing her notes as the judge entered. No one said a word. The room didn't need volume. It was already full of everything unsaid. Across the aisle sat representatives from Child Services. To them, Ellie was a runaway, a minor without documentation, a liability. Their case was built around one simple argument, that the Ridge Riders Motorcycle Club could not provide a stable, lawful, or healthy environment for a child. They pointed to the club's past, to outdated records, to misconceptions dressed up as facts. They used words like non-traditional and unstable influences. Janet stood slowly when it was her turn. She didn't speak with fire. She didn't need to. She spoke like someone who had walked these halls for decades and knew how to separate truth from performance. She presented Logan's original guardianship petition. She read directly from the rejection that he had been denied due to association with a culturally unorthodox organization. She paused, let that phrase linger in the air. Then she presented reports from the group home where Ellie had been staying. Some were filed by former residents, others by staff who left soon after. Emotional neglect, verbal intimidation, confiscation of personal items, patterns dismissed, buried, or quietly closed. She backed it all with data. Reports from the Children's Bureau showing that over 1/3 of randomly inspected foster homes in the country had failed to meet full safety standards. She referenced a federal GAO investigation that found systemic issues in placement matching and oversight across multiple states. Then, quietly, she placed Ellie's sketchbook on the table and stepped back.
The judge leafed through it slowly. Page after page revealed detailed drawings of bikes, helmets, custom flamework, emblems, art that breathed life into steel. And in every page, there was Logan, his legacy, his teachings, his hand passed on through Ellie's. The judge then asked to hear from Gregory. He stood, cleared his throat, and spoke plainly. He talked about Logan, not as a biker, but as a brother, a man who gave more than he took. He talked about Ellie's arrival, about how she didn't ask for protection, only for work, about how she never demanded sympathy, just space to be herself, and how, in her silence, she reminded the crew of something they'd forgotten, why they called each other family in the first place. Then the judge turned to Ellie. Her hands tightened slightly in her lap. She looked up, steady but soft-spoken. "I've been in places that called themselves homes," she said, "but this is the first place where people didn't try to fix me. They just let me draw, let me be, and I want to stay." The room held its breath. After a pause, the judge spoke. "This court grants temporary guardianship of Ellie Holloway to Gregory Moss under supervised conditions. Regular welfare checks will be scheduled.
This arrangement is conditional, and any violation will result in reevaluation." Ellie exhaled, shoulders sinking like she had been holding that breath for years. Janet leaned in, whispered, "That's a win. Not the finish line, but a win." Gregory nodded, his eyes not leaving Ellie. As they stepped out of the courtroom into the quiet afternoon, Lucy held the door, and Charlie was already waiting by the truck. Tommy had texted. Back at the garage, something had been finished while they were gone. Ellie didn't ask. She just smiled, because for the first time in her life, the system hadn't spoken over her. It had listened. Back at the Ridge Riders' garage, the sky was starting to dim into a soft orange, the kind of evening light that made the dust in the air look like it carried stories. Ellie stepped inside, still wearing the clothes she'd worn to court, her sketchbook tucked under one arm. She hadn't said much on the ride back, but as she crossed the threshold into the place that had become her anchor, her eyes widened.
The mural was finished. What had started as rough outlines on the far wall of the paint bay had become something more, something alive. Every member of the club was there, from the old faces to the newest hands, each riding their bike through arcs of flame and shadow. At the very center, Logan leaned into a curve, his figure captured mid-motion, like he was still riding somewhere just out of reach. And behind him, drawn with full detail now, was a second rider, a young girl, face determined, wind in her hair. It was Ellie. Jimmy had stayed up late to blend her earlier sketches into the final image, carefully painting over the pencil lines she never got the chance to finish. And now it was done. Ellie walked up to the wall, ran her fingers along the edge of the painted handlebars, and for a long moment just stood there. Gregory approached from behind, holding something in his hand, a cloth patch, custom-stitched. The background was black, the emblem a softened version of Logan's original design, but this time the initials were different. In silver thread it read E.H. "You're not running anymore," Gregory said quietly. "You're riding." Ellie took the patch, her hand closing around it slowly. Then she looked around the room, at Lucy, at Charlie, at Tommy, at every face that had once seen her as a stranger. And finally, she smiled. Sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. It's about who stays. And it's about who helps you finish the parts of your story you thought were already lost. Ellie didn't just find a garage. She found a home.